A gloomy autumn in a deserted, lonely corner of Britain. This place was possibly once the scene of a dreadful event. Here, a woman may have faced a cruel and frightening death. Why? Who was she? Was she being punished? What had she done? Was she being murdered? 2,500 years later, when her remains were discovered, archaeologists ask, what happened?
I'm sure it wasn't a pleasant death.
The individual appears to have been thrown unceremoniously into the grave.
So this is a unique discovery.
To my mind, the mystery doesn't surround the individual, it surrounds the burial and everything that goes with it.
The case of an Iron Age woman buried in suspicious circumstances is possibly one of the greatest murder mysteries ever investigated. Andy Chapman, a Northamptonshire archaeologist, came across the body during a routine dig in 1996. At first, there seemed to be nothing unusual about the burial, but soon the alarm bells rang, and Andy realized he might be dealing with a case of murder. "2,400 years ago, in this desolate part of England's Northamptonshire, a heinous crime may have been committed. A woman was buried, possibly still alive, seemingly with her arms and legs tightly bound and with a strange metal collar around her neck. Andy Chapman was determined to get to the bottom of this ancient mystery.
Well, this is now just a muddy field again, and there's no sign that we were here. But 4 years ago, all this was stripped down to the bare subsoil, and this is where we found the burial. So as we cleaned the soil away, first of all we found the skull, and then we gradually exposed the whole body. If we imagine just about on this spot now, she was lying down partly on her right side, the arms have been crossed underneath her, and she was lying face down, and her head was bent back with the face right up against the side of the pit. Not a very comfortable position, but then she was past caring by that time.
These photographs of the victim show clearly that her body was buried in a very strange position. There's plenty of room in the pit for the body to have been laid out flat, but she looks as though she was tightly bound up. Now, this wasn't the only case of an Iron Age body being buried crunched up in this way, but this was the only known example in the area. And the position of her head suggested that she was alive and struggling for breath.
It's a very uncomfortable position. I hope she wasn't alive when she went in. As a result of that, most of the facial bones have gone. They've been crushed. Whether that happened before death or after death, we can never be certain.
When Andy Chapman first saw the skeleton, it certainly looked like the victim had suffered a very frightening death. This was a puzzle for the archaeologist. The local press got very excited about the find. Journalists concluded that the body must be that of a witch. After all, she may have been buried alive, tightly bound, and wearing a weird neck ring. So, was she indeed an evildoer who needed to be punished by other members of her community?
Now, finding a burial in a pit like this, it's possible to jump to all sorts of conclusions about how this person may have got there. They may have been murdered and just dumped in the pit, hidden away so that nobody knew about it. They may have been buried alive, they may have been sacrificed and then buried afterwards. All we've got is a few bones to go on. We've got a hole in the ground and a heap of bones. But the whole point of the object is to try and reconstruct a story of how did this person really get here.
In order to find out exactly how old the bones are, Andy Chapman sent samples off to be radiocarbon dated. The results showed that the woman lived during the Middle Iron Age, around 400 BC. The skeleton was found in a remote part of England's East Midlands, on a hillside overlooking Northampton, a settlement that's been inhabited since prehistoric times. It blossomed in the 8th century, and by medieval times, it had become renowned for its shoemakers. During the Iron Age, there would have been just a scattering of small farming settlements here. Living in the raw of nature, life was harsh and death frequent. So how did these Iron Age Celts see death among their own peoples? Iron Age skeletons are extremely rare finds. During this time, The dead would be cremated or their remains left out to rot naturally. Dr. Andrew Fitzpatrick, an expert in Iron Age religious rites, has a theory on why there was only one body found buried on the hillside.
In modern Western society, we tend to think of having one God. As in Christianity, there is one single figure. But many societies, certainly in the past, thought of there being many gods. They believed in gods, some of whom were a god of war, another one who'd be the god of the underworld, gods who would ensure prosperity and look after people on their journeys. So we shouldn't think of a single god, but we should think of many gods. So the diversity of religion should lead us to think, I would say, that we should have a diversity in burial rites. Not all the people who lived in even a small-scale community were selected for burial in this way. And one of the interesting questions, but one which we don't know the answer to, is why only some people are selected.
So why was this woman selected? After all, she was the only burial from this time period found on the site. What was special about her? Was she a valued member of the clan or an outcast? Forensic science might help solve the mystery. The historic city of Canterbury, site of the infamous murder of Archbishop Thomas Becket and Chaucer's medieval tales, is Chapman's next destination. Its most prominent landmark is the 7th century cathedral. This magnificent monument and the streets surrounding it still exude the atmosphere of Old England. Trevor Anderson is an expert in bones. He will be able to give Andy Chapman a profile of the woman, her age, health, and stature, and may even be able to tell how she died. But it's not just ancient victims Anderson examines. Occasionally, he works with the police when they come across a potentially suspicious death. Can his expertise help with this suspicious death?
These remains that he's bringing down seem as if they're going to be very exciting. We've got a good idea of the date, and we know from the site photographs that the individual appears to have been thrown in unceremoniously into the grave. We know a lot about Iron Age buildings, forts, but we know relatively little about burial. So it's very interesting to have an Iron Age burial, and this one is even more interesting because of the unusual position of the body in the grave. So it all begins to add up to something that I think is going to be a very interesting project.
Who was this woman? What was her position in the community? A noble woman? A working woman? An outcast? Why was she buried in such a strange position? Can her bones help Andy Chapman find out what happened to her?
We've got the bones that we really need for working out the sex. We've got most of the pelvis.
First, Anderson confirms the sex of the victim. Grooves and notches in the pelvis suggest that indeed it is a female. The skull can verify this.
If you look here, just above the eye sockets, this is the frontal bone, and can you see how that rises straight up? It goes straight, it doesn't curve back at all, and there's a lack of brow ridges. That area is very, very smooth, and that is typically female. That's a very female-looking skull.
How old was she when she died, then?
Well, we can tell that because we have the teeth here, and you can see there's not that much wear on those teeth at all, and that makes it look as if she may still just be in her 20s. But then when we look at the upper jaw, you can see that these molars here on the right side, these have been lost during life because the socket has totally healed over there. And in addition, those two molars have been lost many years before death because the loss of bone around the region of the teeth. So she's probably older than the lack of attrition suggests, probably in her 30s or maybe about 40.
In the ancient world, life expectancy was short. This was a good age. She could easily have been a grandmother.
We have in the lower spine, in the lumbar spine, evidence that the joints themselves have been compressed.
Is this telling us anything about her life, the sort of work she was doing every day?
Well, it suggests that she didn't have a completely easy life. She was involved in repetitive tasks, quite a lot of pressure on the spine, quite a lot of bending, possibly carrying objects on her head even. Now this is the bone just above the feet. If you're standing upright, that's more or less the position of your lower leg. But when you're squatting, this bone comes forward like that and is flexed on the feet bones. And that, when we look, is exactly what you've got there, because there's the joint surface, and the joint surface is extended forward over there, where my finger is now, and that's formed a new facet. That's called a squatting facet. So we've got evidence that she was spending a lot of time squatting down.
So we could imagine kneeling down, grinding the wheat for the flour.
That would make sense, because you've got the evidence of the squatting on the ankle bones, and also the grinding, the moving backwards, forwards, pushing, would be pressure on the back as well. So that seems to fit in. But of course, you're really interested in this, aren't you, because she was buried in this rather strange position. Looking at the bones, there's no obvious pathology as to why the bones should be in that position. One or two other things that we might want to consider from a medical point of view. After death, from about 12 hours to 36 hours, you have a period in which rigor mortis sets in. After 36 hours, it wears off. But between those time periods, the body is more or less immovable. The limbs will be held in that position. So if she had died in a position such as you suggest, with the lower limbs tightly contracted and the upper arms under her body, and she was buried, let's say, a day after her death, it would be difficult to move the limbs.
So what you're saying then is that the position she was in was most likely just part of the ritual of the burial. There's no other reason why she would have been in that position.
I think she's been deliberately placed like that.
Bone analysis shows that the victim probably lived an ordinary life, but the mystery is still to be solved. Why was this the only body to have been found here? The metal neck collar might provide a vital clue.
We've been cleaning the burial up, and I'd actually gone on to do some other work at the time, and the person who was working on it walked across to me, and they were holding this length of twisted lead, and they showed this to me and said, "Is this anything special?" And as soon as they put it in front of me, I knew, well, it could only have come from one thing, a neck ring or collar around the burial. And as far as I knew then, no other burials had ever been recovered with one of these collars actually in place around the neck. I think I spent the next few minutes running around the site shouting.
As the only Iron Age burial found in England with a metal torc in place around the deceased's neck, the evidence perhaps adds weight to the local newspaper's accusation that Andy has uncovered Britain's first witch. Was this heavy lead neck ring to weigh her spirit down and prevent her returning to haunt us? Could there be any truth to these superstitious rumours?
We know we've got a woman 30 to 40 years old, about average height. We know she's been doing a certain amount of work for a living, but not an excessive amount. She is in pretty good state of health for her age, so there's still something we have to explain here. Just how did she get in this position? How did she die?
Perhaps the most useful clue lies in the torc, the neck collar found with the body. Torcs were very special items of Celtic jewellery, usually worn by warriors and leaders. They were lengths of metal, bent into a circular shape and worn around the neck, with rounded terminals at the front. The Celts would bury treasuries of gold and silver torcs as offerings to the gods, such as these from the largest hoard found in Norfolk. Dr. Andrew Fitzpatrick believes that the presence of the torc might cast light on how this woman was regarded by her community.
The way these things were used were to display status. But we also find ordinary people with torcs around their necks throughout the Iron Age for a period of 500 years or so. That's quite a long time. It's like almost from the time of Christopher Columbus to the present day. But within that period, the meaning and usage of torcs changes. So they start off, I think, as being very high status objects, then they become a bit more mundane, and then later on, I think, they become a sign of a god. So they're obviously something which the Celts felt brought great powers to them. And that may be quite important in trying to understand why the lady who is buried in the settlement just up behind me here had a neck ring. Maybe she was very important, and she was very highly regarded in her society.
If torcs were associated with status and divinity, was the burial a religious rite? Exactly what kind of importance did the woman have? Her torc was strange, different from others found, made of lead, broken in two, and positioned back to front. Chapman took it to Butser Ancient Farm in Hampshire, an Iron Age working museum, to get some more clues.
Oh, David, there's the torc.
Oh, lovely, yes.
David Freeman has studied Iron Age metallurgy. Perhaps he can help solve the puzzle of why the torc was broken in two and worn backwards.
So there's a number of interesting aspects about the torc. One is, of course, we've got those nice rounded terminals.
Yes.
The decorative pieces, which you'd expect to be at the front.
Yes.
We're actually at the back of the neck as we found the body.
So the torc was actually on backwards?
Yes.
Good heavens. So,
of course, while most of the torc's quite well made, we've got the twisted metal. These ends are quite obviously much more roughly finished. You can see the perforation there. And this side, there's just two notches roughly cut into the metal. So, how do you see that perhaps being fastened?
Well, one assumes if the torc was made in one piece, it may have been a fracture. Lead won't stand too much movement. It may well be an attempt to sort of hold it in one piece. Possibly a leather thong through there. And if it's laid either side of that one, so you've actually got a loop, and then using the notches there to actually bind it using perhaps a linen thread.
And that would have made, in effect, a leather hinge.
A leather hinge, that's right. I don't suppose we'll ever know unless we could time travel. That would be very useful. But certainly we can have a look at the object as a working item, and perhaps that will give us some clues.
Yes.
The torc was well made, the terminals neatly finished, and the twist very even. What stands out is the break and the crude chiselling of the broken ends. Could the break have occurred when making the torc for a particular occasion? Is the rough hinge a quick repair?
I've got some lead tin mix waiting on the fire. Let's fill the mould and then see what happens from there.
Lead occurs naturally in combination with an ore called galena, easily obtainable and easily smeltable, but far less valuable than gold or silver. Perhaps this was the best that people from a simple farming community could afford for their religious rite. Lead would have been shiny when new and a good, cheaper alternative to a precious metal.
And then a nice, gentle pour into the mould so that it fills nice and evenly. It'll change from a silver to a nice grey. There it goes, and then we can just leave it to cool. Well, that's solidified nicely. What I'm going to do is lever it out from the end very gently, lift it without trying to bend it too much.
In Celtic societies, the smith was amongst the most highly honoured of craftsmen. The art of changing dull ore into shiny molten metal, which hardened and could be fashioned, was magical, alchemical, considered a divine art.
Okay, twisting. I'm going to cheat. I'm going to use some spanners, and I'm also going to use some pieces of leather in the spanners themselves so that we don't mark the lead any more than we have to. Right, here we go. Ah,
yes.
There we go. Question of whether we can get an even twist. Oh, it's going nicely at this end. Yes, there's a lovely twist developing there, look. But, of course, on yours, we've also got something else, which is the rounded ends. And to do that, we need a hammer. Now, again, this work hardens it as well, so we've got to be a little bit careful. You see, that's beginning to round off. If you take a little bit of time, eventually you will end up with a nice round end on your terminal.
But how did the victim's torc break? Was it deliberate or an accident?
Now, the next stage is the most critical of all. What we're going to do now is bend it that way to become torc shape. Now, what we do is very gently, a little bit at a time. There you go, look.
The position of the fracture in the new torc is remarkably similar to the one in the original.
Now, before that actually drops into two halves, give you a chance to handle it. You can see the problem immediately. Because we've work hardened it, we're already developing a fracture in the middle. But if you would like to just try to bend it very gently, just to take that final fracture out into two halves. It won't take very much pressure, just gently push together. Now it's gone, look. You can turn that over and have a look. There's the fracture, and with very little more effort, gone. It's as simple as that, yeah.
But not quite exactly.
Not quite exactly.
Just like the one
just like the original.
So there's our excavated one in its two pieces, and there's the one you've just made.
Yes.
In its two pieces.
That's right.
After
yes.
breaking.
So the torc, a sacred item, could have been specially made for a religious event and broke in the manufacturing, as this one did. The rough hinge could be a hasty repair done in time for a special event. But what exactly was the event? A murder? A religious ritual, or the punishment of a witch?
I didn't believe she was a witch at all. using a term like which comes out of medieval Christianity and has all these problems of post-medieval Christianity as well, with witchcraft and so on, I don't think it helps us at all in trying to understand the way people lived in the Iron Age. And I think general opinion is that virtually all these burials are ritual sacrifices of some sort.
Dr. Fitzpatrick is an expert in Iron Age burial and ritual sacrifice, so Andy Chapman has invited him to the scene of the crime to ask his opinion.
Just why is she there? What reason was she buried? What was the thinking behind it at the time was obviously the question we were posed.
If we think about how people were buried in the Iron Age, most people, well, we don't know what happened to most of them, do we? We find bits of people on settlements as well, skulls, long bones, and maybe partial burials. But what we think is that most of the people were put out into the countryside and for their bones to be picked clean by the animals and the birds of the kinds which we've seen circling around here. And only sometimes were parts of them brought back for burial in the settlement. So a complete burial is actually quite unusual.
We're still left with this question of just what happened at her death. One idea that I've been playing with is that perhaps she was a sacrifice, possibly it was a time of need. Their crops had failed, their animals were dying, so she may have been perhaps even a voluntary sacrifice to help ensure the life of her grandchildren.
I'm not sure I agree with you there. I think sacrifices are very rare at this time. We know that they happen. We can identify them in certain places, maybe to bring good luck to that settlement. So sacrifice can have many different roles in trying to see into the future, to thank the gods, to try and bring more powerful magic to your settlement and to your people, and sometimes to say sorry to the gods. So those kind of contexts are quite clear to me as an archaeologist. I'm not sure that this is particularly unusual, and I wonder whether the talk really tells us this woman was very important and much loved member of her community, rather than she was deliberately killed.
So another way of looking at this burial is that perhaps this woman was actually the grandmother of her people. Her children, her grandchildren were there when she was buried, so they're actually burying her with respect as a valued member of the community.
Indeed.
And that was why she may have warranted such a valuable object in their terms.
Of course, it's the mourners who have made this statement. It's what people think about that woman. And if they feel that they regarded her so highly and she was so popular, they may have chosen to put this unusual and rare find with her, but turning it round on her neck so it faced the other way, so that the status which she took with it in life couldn't be carried into the other world with her. It's a really fascinating find.
So Dr. Fitzpatrick has introduced a new, less sinister theory: burial, not sacrifice. But Chapman remains suspicious.
Well, while we have this other story now, that she may have been the grandmother who was buried with respect, she still can't just be the average grandmother, because they didn't all end up in the ground. So there's still something more to this story. There's still an extra dimension that we can't account for just from this heap of bones in the pit.
Did the victim end up in the ground as a sacrifice to a Celtic fertility god in times of need? Was she buried? Punished? Can we reach any conclusions?
So we started our story in a muddy field in Northamptonshire, and there we found this 2,500-year-old burial of a woman buried face down in the pit, very uncomfortable position, with this lead collar around her neck. And as the archaeologist responsible for this find, my job has been to try and find out just why she got there. And the idea that she was a witch is just nonsense, but also clearly she wasn't a murder victim or something like that. She's a ritual burial put in the ground for a special purpose by her people. And I think we must see these people as farmers. They depended on their crops and their animals. If they failed, they died. So I think we're seeing something in time of great need, perhaps famine, drought, animals dying of disease. There was a need to make a sacrifice. So I think here, in a time of extreme danger, perhaps she paid the ultimate price and offered herself as a human sacrifice to help save her children and perhaps her grandchildren.